You have to go back to when we dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was like a fire alarm throughout the universe because the universal community realized that we had technology, but we were not spiritually evolved to handle it. We didn't have the ethics, and we certainly didn't we were spiritually corrupt. The other thing that they knew that we did not realize, our scientists did not realize, is that the immense release of that energy in that short amount of time actually affected other dimensions, not just ours. When a race has a level of spirituality equal to or close to their technology, they have a greater chance of survival. When a race has higher technology and very low spirituality, like we have, there's a great chance for self destruction. When a race has high spirituality and low technology, for example, like Native Americans and the Amazon people of the Amazon, there's a greater chance of assimilation being taken over by someone with higher technology.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast, where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jumi Moses, spiritual seeker and metaphysical investigator, exploring the mysteries of existence. On the show today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Vecchiet. Paul is a design manager for the government and draws from real life experiences from his novel, The Disclosure Paradox. Inspired by transformative meditation experiences in 2009, the novel incorporates elements of Paul's personal journey, including the journey of an underground space beneath a military warehouse during his early military career. Through his writing, Paul encourages readers to explore hidden truths and imagine new realities. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today on Shifting Dimensions. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. I just came in from working outside, so my throat is a little scratchy from the pollen or whatever it is outside, but I should be okay.
Well, you sound good to me. So I really love the title of your book, The Disclosure Paradox. And disclosure is one word that sparks a lot of curiosity amongst people right now in the UFO space. And then
Yes.
paradox is another amazing word because I think it captures how convoluted things are right now in the spiritual, ufology, extraterrestrial, and government.
Hmm.
All everything piled up together where as we talk about these subjects. I want to start off first talking about your military background. And was there anything you experienced while in the military that inspired you to write this book?
There was only one incident that I had in the military. It didn't inspire me to write the book. It inspired me to be inquisitive. The inspiration of writing the book came much later. But I was a construction manager, a captain in the U.S. Air Force, and that was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That was the cradle of the research and development for the Air Force at that time. And the place that I was at, where I was a construction manager, was Ford Technology Division. And Ford Technology Division is the organization that is responsible for looking at weapon systems from other countries, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and then taking advantage of them, making reports. And then they would take those reports and hand it across the base where we do the research and development. And that's where they actually come up with ideas for weapon systems. So my project was in that facility, Foreign Technology Division, and it's a very secure facility. It was in a warehouse. It used to be a warehouse, a two-story metal building, about 250 by 250 feet. And when you got there, there were motion detectors around the lawn. And even if you had a top secret clearance, you had to be escorted. So I noticed going in through the double doors after, with my escort that on the doors there were no numbers, no names, there were no directories, and it was all where individuals in one office would not know what's going on in your office. So it was compartmented. And my project was on the second floor. And it was to install a large computer system on the second floor. So the whole second floor was gutted. And I was there to make sure that there was no possibility for the contractor to have a claim against the government. That was my role there. I needed to look at drawings that we gave the contractor, and they're called as-built drawings. And the as-built drawings indicate the condition of the facility prior to construction. So I was using those drawings, I was looking through them, and I noticed that one of the drawings indicated that there was a basement in this building, which was a warehouse. Usually warehouses are not built with basements. They just add on more space. It's just not economical to do a basement in a warehouse. But looking at the floor plan and looking at the outline, it matched the floor plan of the building. So it was authentic. Then I thumbed through some more drawings and I realized that there is a drawing that indicates that there is a cryogenic chamber in this basement measuring 70 by 90 feet. That's a very large cryogenic chamber. It's not just for germs or viruses or even small creatures. This was for very large specimens. And I reasoned that something was going on here because in this secure facility, we had a cryogenic chamber that no one knew about and that probably based on it being foreign technology, it had to do with something foreign. I reasoned that this was information that I didn't need to know and making sure that my escort did not see that I saw these drawings, rolled them up, made sure that they were put where I found them. And I kept that information on the back of my mind for a while. It wasn't something that pressured me. I didn't feel any stress about having this sense of information. I just calmly just kept it in the back of my mind. And I didn't tell anyone about it for about 5 years after I left the service. So this is one element that when I found this out, I reasoned that there was information that we were not being told about, even in the military.
Thank you for sharing that. And it almost sounds like I guess, the blueprint of the technology that you came across. Is that an accurate way to
Yes.
describe it? it is it fair to say that it was extraterrestrial in nature? Now that you've thought about it, now that you've processed it all these years later, would you say that this was otherworldly technology that we got a hold of as the US government?
When I started to do more research later on in the years, like 2009, 10, 11, one of the books that I read was the book by Phil Corso, which is called The Day After Roswell. And in that book, he does describe shipping the cadavers to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So that kind of aligned with that story that he had in his book. And his book was nonfiction.
It's interesting because I think a lot of conversations around technology, the government, and extraterrestrial influence, a lot of times when I talk to people or have these conversations, they reference works and writings that are quote unquote fictional. There's a lot of non-fiction, I guess, instances that actually influence the book. So is there a fear of actually saying that these things are real? Because it feels like a lot of people are hiding behind fiction so that they're
Mm-hmm.
not in some sort of trouble or run into some sort of issues.
All right. There's three reasons why I wrote the book in fiction. One is that all characters are based on real people, and I made up names for these people. I didn't want to reveal their identities. Two, if I were to write a nonfiction book being in the military, I had to go through a process of a formal review with the military. They actually would have had to review the manuscript and ensure that there was no sensitive information in there. And three, there's the 2 points to three. One is that I can't compete with nonfiction authors that are famous, that have a following, that have their own podcasts and their shows, and they've been around and they've done many books about usually the same issue, but in a different manner. But I want to write fiction because there are many people that see a book about that in nonfiction, and they get turned off about it. They feel that there's a lot of stuff in there that they just can't accept, and they're not willing to take that leap of logic. But if I wrote it in fiction, I would attract those people. And then, in hinting that there is stuff there that is based on real events and real people, it would make them think about what they're reading, and also it would make them perhaps do their own research and vet what I wrote and find out what is in fact true and what has been written just to enforce the plot.
That makes sense. So you said that it wasn't really anything during your military career that made you write the disclosure paradox. But I heard that you had two out of body experiences actually. And let me know if I'm
Right.
wrong, if I'm misspeaking, that were actually more of the inspiration to you writing the book. So can you talk about that a little bit and what did you experience during those out of body experiences?
Yeah, those were two instances that I included in the book as events that happened to me that I applied to the main character. What really made me write the book was in 2009. It was the eye-opening event where I was watching Ancient Aliens, and there was a show about the Book of Ezekiel, which was with Eric von Daniken. Now that hit me because back when I was in high school, I happened to be listening to a rock station and I fell asleep. And then when I woke up, I was listening to an interview with Eric von Daniken talking about that very thing, the Book of Ezekiel, and how it was misinterpreted, and that it really is about contact with extraterrestrials and high technology, and that there are many other instances in the Bible that have that. So I recalled that when I was watching the show. And then what else happened is that I remembered what happened when I was in the Air Force, and I put those two together. And not only I become inquisitive, but I actually went on a quest to find more by meeting people, by talking to people, by reading things online, and just making more doing research. And what I found out was, first of all, that I had an interest in a lot of the things that the government was telling us about. For example, patents that were done to help save energy or reduce our consumption on fuel, the the control of big pharma on healthcare, and the the use of our colleges as research and development, free research and development for big corporations, things like that. And so I was talking to people, finding people that had those same interests, and I found out that a lot of them also were saying that they had contact, that they saw these things, and some said that they were abducted. Some said that they actually had implants, and they opened up to me for some odd reason, and but they were very defensive with other people because they were being ostracized by their family, or they were being told that they were crazy. So what I did is I set up a group in Facebook called Spirits and Healing, and we had as many as 300 people in there like that were saying that they had contact, they had their own abductions. And a common thing in there was that people that have had those experiences were also saying that they were psychic. And then another thing is that they were talking how it was important to meditate, because when you meditate, you can have the opportunity to communicate with beyond things beyond Earth. So I got interested in that, and I also were as I was talking to these psychics, they would tell me one by one that I had a role to play. And one actually turned out to be my spiritual mentor, who I fictionalized in the book. And she would go into a trance and she would be a medium for me with a group that calls themselves the Watchers. And they would contact me through her and they would validate my role. And they told me that I was a counselor and informer. Now, with this group that I did on Facebook, I also set up a blog and it was called The Red Pill. Not long after that, I lost my job on the outside and I decided to go back into the government. But before I did that, I had to get off the red pill and I also stopped that group of spirits of healing because they were going to do a search and I knew that if they found things like that that they wouldn't hire me. So I did that and I got into the government and I also started to meditate and when I started to meditate things really started to happen to me. And when I got that information from those watchers saying that I was a counselor and informer, I reasoned that I probably needed to write a book. And I took all the information that I got from the red pill, I kept it and I documented it. And I used that to put together things in the book. All the main characters that I have in the book are based on people that I met in that Facebook group. And and then yes, there were two out of body experiences. One in 2012 after I joined the Army Corps of Engineers. That it was first of all I was advised by those watchers that I would be tested. I don't know how, I didn't know how they would be testing me, but I later on I went through a meditation and I went through what people would say was a wormhole where there was motion, there was velocity, there was light. If you saw the film Contact with Jodie Foster, it was like that sequence. And my heart was racing, I had perspiration, everything was vibrating. And once I realized what was happening, I was back in my body. So that was one instance. 2 years after that, I had another out of body experience, a more profound one, where I saw before me a cloud of indigo. And when I saw this cloud of indigo, I actually had a feeling of euphoria, which was beyond happiness that you would get on Earth. Kind of what when people talk about being in a near death experience and going to the light and having that feeling. I, that's what I think it was. That cloud dissipated, and what I saw all across the horizon was flashes of indigo. And those flashes were what I was being told was our spirits between lives. And the euphoria was getting stronger. I think the euphoria comes from just the right vibration affecting you. I think that's what the euphoria is. It's not like it's a feeling of love. It's just that you get the right vibration and it affects your senses in that way. These flashes that were happening, that were spirits between lives, those flashes were then downloading their past life in this massive group or uploading their next life. And what the message I got too was that all of those energies, all in that one mess that was like a beehive of activity, was what people call God. All those energies make up one big energy called God. When I learned that, I was back in my body, and I took those two things and I used them in the plot to explain our relationship with the rest of the universe, what happens to us when we pass away, why are we here, all the questions that people have often when they ponder about life, they're all in that book.
Very fascinating. And that second out of body experience that you just explained almost sounds like what some people experience when they have near-death experiences. And it's interesting because the more I have these conversations and do this work, the more I learn that you don't have to have a near-death experience in order to go to the other side. And I'm using that in quotations because that's the layman term of trying to explain what I'm trying to explain right now. So you mentioned the
Yeah,
fact that you were on this journey, you're learning all these different things, you start this blog called The Red Pill. You talk to these two psychics, you have so many mystical things are happening to you, and your mind keeps getting illuminated, and you're going down different rabbit holes. But then you talk about the fact of having to, for example, shut down the Red Pill blog, right? Because you were looking
right,
to get hired by the government. So,
right.
what's the difference between shutting that down and then having conversations like this that are on public platforms? Do you ever worry that these conversations will be discovered and affect your work?
One is that this conversation has nothing to do with national security. As long as I am not talking about national security, especially like current national security, that's one thing. But regarding disclosure, regarding information about the paranormal and extraterrestrials and their technology, the government doesn't care anymore because they don't even acknowledge this kind of information. In this day and age of the internet, the more information that is out there, the better it is for them because the average person cannot tell the difference between what is truth and what is a hoax. So the more information that is out there, the better. They won't acknowledge it, they won't deny it anymore. They just let it go. And it really benefits them because the average person can't really tell the difference. That's why the X Files, people see that there's some things in there that are based on real facts, but it's also mixed in with a lot of fantasy and a lot of hoaxes. The average person will take all that and consider it fantasy, but other people who are in the know, like people in my circle of friends and perhaps yours too, they understand. They could tell the difference, and the government doesn't mind that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time that we live in now because we have to use a lot of discernment to figure out what's real versus what's not. And like you said, we're constantly, in a way, even those of us who can tell the difference between fake information in this space versus what could be true, there's this we're in an information age where it's very easy to be gaslit, where someone can tell you what you're perceiving is not true. So it's very interesting and it takes a lot of discernment. So it makes sense that they're not paying too much attention. So now I want to go deeper into some of the themes of the book, right? First and foremost, let's start with the title, which again, I love the disclosure paradox. It seems intentional that you put those two words together. Or I don't know if you put them together because I've heard the disclosure paradox. I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
But I just want to hear more from your perspective why disclosure could be paradoxical.
All right. You have to go back to when we dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was like a fire alarm throughout the universe because the universal community realized that we had technology, but we were not spiritually evolved to handle it. We didn't have the ethics, and we certainly didn't we were spiritually corrupt. The other thing that they knew that we did not realize, our scientists did not realize, is that the immense release of that energy in that short amount of time actually affected other dimensions, not just ours. So that's why it was like a fire alarm throughout the universe. That's why they sent scientists to check out White Sands Missile Base and all those places where they had the Roswell crashes and there was a crash in Russia. And to this day, they still do reconnaissance of our nuclear facilities, even where facilities we have warheads that are being stored that are top secret. They know where they all are and they monitor them. So They understand that we are not spiritually evolved. Why is that? Because it's our DNA. It's our DNA that is the original sin, not what the Bible says. So that's why we can't get rid of it. That's why for some odd reason they masked that part. Whoever came up with that original sin story. It's our DNA that makes us barbaric, violent, having an irrational obsession with possessions, and worst of all, being racist to the point of being genocidal on our very own, having mass murders on our own. They that is abhorrent to the rest of the universal community. And until we change fundamentally, we are not allowed to be with the universal community. We are under a quarantine. We're under a universal, a technological and social quarantine. And that is because we are a dangerous species. We're very intelligent. In fact, I think we're more intelligent than they are. They're just more developed than we are. They've been around longer. So they've been around long enough to develop all of their technology. But the difference is that they are spiritually evolved and we're not. And as long as we are so far away from the level of spirituality that we should be, we are not allowed to go beyond Earth. Why is that? Because, and this is the thing about disclosure, where it's not really in our best interest. If we were to have disclosure, we would eventually have contact. If we were to have contact, we would have a technological exchange. If we would have a technological exchange, our lesser and our more evil and our greed, all of those energies would take over, just like what we have now. They would take that technology, weaponize it, and use it against those that gave it to us. And they're concerned about that because they saw what we did to the Native Americans. They saw what we did to the Aborigines. They saw what we're doing to the people in the Amazon. And they think the same way, especially since they're so different than us. They know that they're certain that we will come up with excuses to eradicate them, either through like manifest destiny or the Monroe Doctrine or weapons of mass destruction or even spreading Christianity. Those are all excuses we used to justify genocide, and we would do the same thing in space.
Okay, so there's so much there, and I'm going to try to make sure that I can properly express all the thoughts that are popping up into my head. So, first and foremost, before I ask all the other questions I have in my head, you talk about these technologies and contact and disclosure. But many would argue that they've been giving us technology throughout the years. For example, the pyramids. A lot of people believe that the pyramids are ET technology.
Mm-hmm.
Even with the nuclear bombs, a lot of people believe that was ET technology. And to your point about how that happened in Japan, Hiroshima, and how that changed the course of a lot of things, I thought about this movie from Marvel, and I don't know if you're a big Marvel fan or watch superhero movies, but they have a movie called The Eternals, which are these synthetic AI extraterrestrials who land on Earth and kind of become one with the human race. They look like humans, but they're more AI. Long story short, after the bomb on Hiroshima in the movie, it triggers this event in the cosmos where it's decided that Earth has to be destroyed. And basically, I guess a new God that's in gestation under the earth will rise up and come out of gestation or come out of the bottom of the earth. But the point is that event triggered the end of the earth. So it's interesting that you're saying that because that's been depicted somewhat in movies. So the first question I want to ask you before we go down that rabbit hole is for the listeners who are listening, because we talked about information and what to believe. Where are you getting this information from outside of the stuff that's documented with the Roswell and so on and so forth? Where are you getting this information about disclosure and how extraterrestrials view us as a human race?
There was a man, Robert Dean. He was a contactee. He was psychic, and so he had the ability to communicate with extraterrestrials with his mind. The army made him like a official contactee, and they would have him make contact. When he learned that their intents were not in alignment with what he believed in, I guess he went rogue and he would contact these extraterrestrials and ask them questions about life, about ourselves. And he got that information. He got the information about our DNA. They told him how we were a dangerous species. They told him that we need to change fundamentally. And he's one. There are many other people that have passed away. I think I forget. There was a woman, and she passed away recently, but she was also spiritual, psychic, and she would say have the same things. And then some of the stuff I got through meditation, some of the stuff I got in my dreams, and I think that's another way that we get communicated. It aligns with those beliefs, and also just reading things in the Bible and reading between the lines and being more inquisitive about what is in the Bible rather than being someone that is reading for praising God. We're being more about skepticism and getting to the truth. And there's so many people that have validated what I'm talking to you about, that have had contact with extraterrestrials, that they prefer to be obviously anonymous, but they have contacted me and said, "Yeah, you're right. This is exactly what's going on, and we need to do something about it." And I believe that there are many people, not just myself, but there are other people that have this role to help awaken humanity. And I call it like a sleeper cell. And some of some people out there have not had that epiphany that I had about what I needed to do. They're still sleeping, but something's going to help them wake up. And as I mentioned in the preface, we all have roles to play, some larger than others. Your role right now is important. And some roles are light workers, some people are warriors. I am a counselor informer, and recently, actually, I was told by a very spiritual psychic woman that no, I'm not a counselor informer. I am a liaison. And I thought, liaison, okay, so between who and what? That's another element that has been revealed to me.
A lot of people also talk about the term of being a star
Yeah,
seeds, and how some people who are incarnated right now here on Earth come from other star systems, and they've incarnated here to help raise the collective consciousness so that we could become more in tune with our spirituality. Because you are right, I think the way we operate in terms of war, racism, sexism, classism, it is very barbaric, and we are intelligent and we have all this technology, but on a spiritual level we've been stunted for such a long time, and I think we're starting to see that shift. But you said something that was very interesting, right? Where you talked about, and you talk about in your book, I believe, the fact that this concept of original sin is more in line with an issue with our DNA, our makeup, right? So when you say that, a couple of things pop up into my head. First and foremost, I think about this idea of us being created by another, like our biological suits, right? Because our souls were not necessarily created, or our spirit were not created by like other extraterrestrial beings per se, but our physiology, our physical bodies, they talk about us being created by other extraterrestrials, one of them being the Anunnakis, for example. So is that
I've
your
heard
belief
that.
system? And if, or what's your belief system around that? And if our DNA is corrupted, then is there really hope for us to elevate spiritually while
Right.
in this body?
It's like alcoholism. Alcoholism. In order to cure, the alcoholic must identify themselves that they are alcoholic, that they have a problem. Right now, we're not being told by the masses that we have a problem. In fact, a lot of Christianity and Catholics says that we're perfect, that we were made in the form of God. So one paradox that I have is that how are we as a human race supposed to improve ourselves spiritually if we're not allowed to know what's wrong with us? That's that is the spiritual paradox. The other paradox, of course, is that for disclosure is that there will be unintended consequences. Yeah, the like you were saying that original sin. Oh, you were asking me about who created us. I wouldn't say it's a belief, but it certainly is a darn good theory. And they say that it's related to 90,000 year old gold mines in Africa. And gold, of course, is the best electric conductor. And the theory was that we were made to mine as like a slave race for these higher intelligence beings. That doesn't sound too far-fetched, especially when if we were hastily put together, we have a lot of flaws. And when they say that God made us, I don't too many flaws for God to make us. That's what I feel. As I mentioned, when I saw that indigo cloud, that mass, and what God is, it could create because according to the science of noetics, which is the science of the power of thought, if each one of those spirits have a power to think, and then if you combine all of those spirits in one consciousness, and if they have one thought, you can imagine the power behind that. So God is a creator, but nothing more. God is neither bad nor good. It's just an energy. And our lives, we're here to help train our spirits who are linked to us about love, about pain, suffering, beauty, creativity, all those things that contribute to the human element. The spirit, which is an energy, they can't do that. They have to link to us to actually understand and experience that. So this is a school for the spirit. And if God was to help us, and when people pray and they hope for things to happen, it doesn't happen that way because it's a school. And if you are in school, you're not given the answers to the test. You have to learn from experience. That's the only way. If we got the answers, it would be cheating. There is no more of a role that God has other than creation.
Okay, very fascinating there. And I'm glad that you brought up your out of body experiences where you saw your out of body experience where you saw the souls. I believe you said downloading their new life. Sounds like reincarnation. And so I wanted to ask you about that because a lot of what you're saying, I see threads to other conversations I've had. So a lot of people in the spiritual community will adhere to everything that you're saying in terms of us needing to learn lessons. And I assume it's fair to assume that you believe in reincarnation and we continue to incarnate back until we learn the right lessons.
Exactly. Until we learn all the lessons, then we advance, we graduate to the next level of existence. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's one side of things. Another side that I've been researching now for the last couple of months has to do with the fact that many people believe and have received messages that Earth is more of a space of confinement, right? When it comes to reincarnation, coming back and having your memory wiped, but having to learn lessons that by the time you figure out, if you ever figure out that, oh, this is a lesson from a last life, you're almost close to the end of that other life, right? So people are constantly in this cycle, in this unending loop, right? A lot of people say it's a 25,000 year cycle, which is crazy to think about. But we also just talked about our DNA and how we were made, right? So,
Yeah.
on one hand, it's we're here to learn lessons, but on the other hand, if you're looking at it through the lens of which we were created, then we were almost set up for
For failure.
failure, right?
Hmm.
So, how do you reconcile both of those things? Because, and just to add again to that argument, is that a lot of people think that they're extraterrestrials who work in the light and want to see human beings ascend. And then there are
Yes.
extraterrestrials that have a more dark nature that benefit from human beings suffering. And those are the ones that created this physical body for spirits to to inhabit and almost be trapped in. So just want to hear your thoughts on how you reconcile flawed DNA that seems to set us up for failure and having to come back constantly to learn lessons.
We were given a hint about how we can evolve spiritually. One is through Buddha, and one is through Jesus. And they both have given us the information to be able to get out of this infinite loop of returning to the same life because of our flaws. So people haven't taken that to heart, really. If we just, there's just one rule that Jesus gave us that's in the Bible. And so he says essentially, we're here to make life better for others instead of making life better for ourselves at the expense of others. If we just follow that rule, we can definitely advance spiritually and get out of it. The other thing that's keeping us from advancing, from what I understand, the that higher beings have is that they've been able to get rid of power and they've been able to get rid of currency. And that those two things are also like the ball and chain with us here spiritually. Money and power are huge detriments to our spirituality. But you mentioned, let's see, what did you mention something about?
I guess reconciling the fact that I think you just answered that
Yeah,
through the teachings of Buddha and Jesus. And I just also mentioned other stuff relating to extraterrestrials who have a more
yes.
negative intent.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. The they're called interdimensionals. And from what I understand, talking to someone that I fictionalized in the book and other people, is that they're called archons. And archons are interdimensional beings that are emotional vampires. They feed off of our negative energies. They feed off of pain, suffering, pornography, lust. They feed off of anything that, you know, anguish, all those negative energies. And since they're addicted to it, it's like a drug to them, just like any other addict, they want more. So they find ways to influence powerful people on this planet to promote that kind of activity so that there is more and more of that emotion and that they're able to feed off of it. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Those archons, they were graphically depicted in Gothic times as those gargoyles and demons, and that's what they are. And they do have a great influence on the way things are going on the planet, unfortunately.
Okay. So just to make it clear, just to make sure I understand, so you do lean towards the belief that these archons are the ones sort of perpetuating the energies of whether it's lust, violence, power, feeding off of our energy. Do
Right.
you also subscribe to the idea that they're the ones that make us keep coming back? That's part of the illusion, or do you think that's separate?
What I mentioned also in the book, and what I found out also talking to one of the people, is that we are in a spiritual war, and we've been in a spiritual war for a very long time. And it is a war between, it is a war for our spirits, and it is about good and evil, right? It benefits the archons who are evil for us to continue to recycle, because then we don't advance to a higher level of good. And so, as they are doing their battles against the good, there aren't any reinforcements for the good as long as we keep recycling. But if we're able to advance, then we join forces eventually with the good. So that's part of that spiritual war that's going on.
Okay, so essentially, there's a potential to break the reincarnation loop.
Yeah, there is.
Interesting. Okay. Because again, like I said, I'm still going down this investigation of that theory, concept, belief. And I'm finding a lot of threads between what people are saying, even though some people are more feel more of a knowing than a belief in this is exactly what's happening versus others that are not quite there yet. So I wanted to see where you felt because especially as we talk about the raise in consciousness, I think it's an important topic to constantly come back to in terms of reincarnation because a lot of people talk about the raising in consciousness and karma and releasing karma. But what if karma, not saying it's not a thing because I think it is a universal law, but what if karma doesn't have to be experienced the way it's being experienced now? And what if we are able to evolve outside of an incarnation? And I think it's important for people to know because a lot of times people get into the spiritual community and they want to release karma so that their next reincarnation is better. But I think part of a spiritual evolution is understanding or talking about the possibility of perhaps not incarnating back if that's not what you want to do. So just the teachings or the
So
understanding of that.
let me explain the law of karma, karmic law. It's not
Okay.
what people think, where it's near term and that it applies to the present life. It applies to your next life. For example, a rapist, when they pass and they download their life and then they upload the next life, and the next life is based on their past life, they will return to learn the lesson. And the lesson essentially is that they will be a victim, to learn that lesson about what they have done to other people. The same thing with a cheater or a liar or someone who takes advantage of the poor or someone that is a bigot against LGBTQ people. They will return as someone that is being oppressed by his past life.
I think many people who are listening to this have probably heard of that before. But again, it just my mind keeps going back to the the generating of pain and trauma, right, as part of life. But then when we think about these archons who feed off of that, then it makes sense to continuously put people in cycles where they don't learn or understand what they did in the previous life or what they experienced, and then they come back again to experience the same thing. And because they have not remembered, that lesson oftentimes isn't learned. So let's say, for example, in the example that you gave, and obviously these things have nuance, but in the example that you gave of someone being sexually assaulted and then, or someone being the assaulter in a past life and coming
Yeah,
back and being the victim in this life, if they don't remember that they were the assaulter in the past life, they could decide to, I don't know, it could lead to years of depression, which again is like negative energy to feed on. It could lead to other things like substance abuse, or it could lead to them being the abuser again because hurt people. So
you're right. Yeah,
again, when you think about that in terms of like our spiritual evolution, it feels like it doesn't feel quite fair, if that makes any sense. And I don't know if that's the right word to use here, but of course, wanted to talk about that a little bit, especially as it pertains to our DNA and how we were created. Okay, switching gears a little bit now, I want to talk a little
but
bit. Sorry, go ahead.
people like that exist. Other people to show their compassion. Everyone that has had that kind of life, they're there's the gift of forgiveness and compassion. And that's part of the lesson too about being human is that even though you can reason that, okay, if that person is having a bad life now, it's probably because that they were bad before. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be compassionate. You should still be that way.
Yes. These topics can be very ineffable the more you talk about them because we're talking about spiritual concepts and they become more and more abstract. So we try our best to give
Hmm.
examples. And yeah, the compassion is a big thing, but it's sometimes it's hard to have compassion when someone has experienced so much pain. But the more you evolve spiritually, and I guess give yourself more grace, the more it's easier to have compassion for people. But there are some evils in the world. There's some evil acts in the world that are just so hard to stomach, right? It feels
Right.
otherworldly and it's really hard to call for compassion sometimes. I want to talk about technology and spirituality. We've talked around it
Okay.
this whole conversation, but I want to touch on that a little bit because I know that's another theme in your book. And of course, we can't talk about all the themes in your book. If people are curious, they need to go and purchase the book and read more about it. But
I think we talked about them all.
okay, okay, great. Okay. So I guess the final thing, just to really drive this home, what is the relationship between technology and spirituality? And I'm not talking about nuclear bombs or anything like that, but I'm talking about stuff like AI, especially in this time that we're living in. Do you see AI as a tool that could usher us into higher consciousness, or do you think it could be very problematic for our spiritual growth?
I don't think it affects the spiritual growth. I think AI will be the result of our spirituality. And I guess it's another one of those technology things where we're probably not ready for that right now. There are many instances of a lack of ethics in just having a quest for the bottom line, which is profit, but not looking at other aspects or other, I guess, effects from using that technology. So I don't think technology and spirituality are related. It's if we had the the spirituality that the good extraterrestrials have, then it would be no problem. There's a an equation that I have regarding spirituality and technology. The reason that you see all of these extraterrestrials and they've been around for such a long time, and we're talking millions of years, is that they have reached a level of spirituality equal to their technology. And so when a race has a level of spirituality equal to or close to their technology, they have a greater chance of survival. When a race has higher technology and very low spirituality, like we have, there's a great chance for self destruction. When a race has high spirituality and low technology, for example, like Native Americans and the Amazon people of the Amazon, there's a greater chance of assimilation being taken over by someone with higher technology. So it's very important in both ways to achieve that balance.
Thank you for that. That was great. Of course, I always say this in every conversation, but it's the truth. We scratched the surface. Thank you so much for going down the different rabbit holes with me. I have to ask you, have you shifted in perspective on anything recently? And it could be as lighthearted as you would like it to be. Maybe you started eating something that you never thought you'd eat before, or it could be as deep as you'd like it to be.
Let me give you a short story if we have some time. My first book, The Disclosure Paradox, was self published in 2019. A former Benedictine priest monk searched for extraterrestrials and spirituality and found that book. And after I wrote that book, and after I wrote another one, which was a prequel for that one based on one of the characters in the first book, I didn't intend to write a third book because there wasn't much popularity in my books. And so I thought maybe there was another way that I needed to be a counselor and informer. But this Benedictine monk contacted me and he friended me and he liked my book. And he said, what's missing from this book is the Shroud of Turin. And with that, he would send me documents. I have over 300 documents over time of research papers from scientists from all over the world, every discipline, that would authenticate the Shroud of Turin. And I thought, wow, this actually could be a good sequel. So I put together an outline, gave it to him, and then 6 months afterwards, I did the manuscript. I gave it to him. He loved it. In fact, there's an entire chapter on the authentication of the shroud based on various disciplines from the research papers that I read. And he actually wrote the foreword for that novel. It was that novel that got the attention of the literary world. And when they learned that I had two other books in the series, then they liked that. And that's how I got the contract. And that's how I got the first book out again, a little cleaner version, but it was republished in February of this year. And the sequel, which is this one right here, Salvation, that will come out in October. And when you talk about a shift, I didn't think much about Jesus Christ or the shroud or the blood or anything like that until I read what that Benedictine monk sent me. And what I read is absolutely profound and goes in line with some of the things that we talked about. For example, the fact is that there is no human match for the blood of Christ. And second is his DNA is different from us. So my hypothesis in the book is if we were to have technology, we could probably harvest his DNA and use it to repair our own DNA to be like him. Because there's two things that made me think about that. There are over 376 verses in the Bible that just mention the blood of Christ. And that's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. There's something about that. And then that cryptic message where he says that the blood will wash away the sins of the earth. And I thought, the DNA is the key. And if they use the DNA to help our DNA, then it gets rid of our original sin. So that's what that book is about.
What a powerful shift, and congrats on the sequel. I would love to have you back on once that book is published because you just sparked my curiosity and I have 100 questions, but we're at the end of today's show because
Right.
wow. Yeah, we need to have a more in-depth conversation about our DNA and the hypothesis you just brought up. Oh gosh, that sounds so fascinating. Paul, I need to have you back on the show. Where can people find you if they want to purchase your book, The Disclosure Paradox, or learn more about you or reach out?
Here's what it looks like, Disclosure Paradox. And I have a website, thedisclosureparadox.com, all one word. It's very well done. People could read about the book, the preface of the characters. They could read some excerpts even. There are links to merchants, Amazon, not only Amazon, but Barnes and Noble. If they're in England, there are merchants there. If they're in Canada, we have merchants in Canada. And they could also read the foreword for the sequel that's coming out. And I'll be updating it with excerpts from that sequel as I work with my publisher. And I'm on Blue Sky, PGV author. Blue Sky, I have over 3,300 followers right now. And I have a group in Facebook called Discussions about the Disclosure Paradox. And there we talk about the topics related to the books, all of the books. And many of the characters, many of the people that I characterize in that book are on that group. It's a great group. There's about 360 people there right now. So they could contact me that way too.
Fantastic. This has been a great conversation, Paul. Thank you so much for stopping by Shifting Dimensions. I'm going to leave all those links in the show notes. It was truly a pleasure.
Thank you.